The glass tower Rohan Desai believed architecture was about creating perfect spaces, not filling them with messy emotions. At 32, his designs graced skylines across 3 continents, each building more innovative and acclaimed than the last. His latest project, a 60-story glass and steel tower in downtown Mumbai, had just won him Architect of the Year, an honor that should have felt like a culmination rather than the hollow victory it was. The celebration was in full swing at the Oberoi Hotel's rooftop bar. Colleagues and competitors mingled, champagne flowed, and Rohan performed his well-rehearsed role of charming visionary. His smile never reached his eyes as he accepted congratulations and deflected questions about his inspiration. "How does it feel to be changing Mumbai's skyline forever?" a journalist asked. Digital recorder extended toward him. "Buildings should speak for themselves," Rohan replied smoothly. "I just draw the lines. The city decides their meaning." It was the kind of quotable non-answer that had become his specialty. As the night wore on, Rohan slipped away from the crowd and found himself on the quieter end of the terrace. Mumbai sprawled before him, a tapestry of lights and shadows. From this height, the city seemed ordered, controllable, exactly how he preferred life to be. "Admiring your handiwork?" a voice asked, interrupting his solitude. Rohan turned to find a woman watching him. She wasn't dressed for the gala. Simple jeans, a kurta, practical sandals. Her dark hair was pulled back, revealing sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to evaluate him with uncomfortable precision. "Do I know you?" he asked, straightening his designer jacket. "I'm Priya Sharma." She didn't offer her hand. "I work in Dharavi, or what's left of it since your company started buying it piece by piece." Rohan's jaw tightened. Dharavi was the site for his company's next major development, a controversial project to revitalize what outsiders called a slum and residents called home. "I design buildings. I don't decide where they go," he said, the practiced distance in his voice unmistakable. Priya laughed without humor. "Convenient separation? Does that help you sleep at night?" Something about her directness caught him off guard. Most people were intimidated by his reputation or charmed by his carefully constructed persona. This woman seemed unimpressed by both. "I sleep perfectly well, thank you. I'm creating modern housing and bringing economic opportunity to an underdeveloped area. You're displacing 4,000 families for luxury condos they'll never afford," Priya countered. She stepped closer, challenging him to look away. "But maybe you'd see that if you ever visited the neighborhood you're redesigning from your glass tower." Before Rohan could respond, she placed something in his hand, a worn business card with an address and Community Action Center printed beneath her name. "We're having an open house tomorrow. See what you're destroying before it's gone." With that, she walked away, disappearing into the crowd before he could formulate a response. Rohan should have tossed the card, should have dismissed her as just another activist who didn't understand progress or economic realities. Instead, he found himself turning it over in his fingers, her challenge echoing in his mind. The next morning, against all reason, Rohan found himself in Dharavi. He'd told his driver to wait at the main road. No need for his gleaming Audi to announce his arrival. He dressed down in slacks and a plain shirt, though he still felt conspicuous as he navigated the narrow lanes. The Community Action Center occupied the ground floor of a modest building. Children's artwork decorated the windows, and a hand-painted sign welcomed visitors in 3 languages. Rohan hesitated at the entrance, already questioning his impulsive decision to come here. Inside, the space hummed with activity. A group of women worked at sewing machines in one corner. Children clustered around tables where volunteers helped with homework. The walls were covered with maps of the neighborhood, development plans, and protest posters. And there was Priya, in the center of it all, directing volunteers and greeting residents by name. She spotted him hovering in the doorway and paused mid-sentence, surprise briefly crossing her face before she excused herself and approached him. "You actually came," she said, her expression a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "I was in the neighborhood," Rohan replied, attempting nonchalance. Priya's raised eyebrow made it clear she didn't believe him. "Well, since you're here, you might as well get the full tour." Blueprints of the Heart. The tour Priya promised was nothing like the sanitized site visits Rohan typically conducted with clients. She led him through Dharavi's labyrinthine alleys with purposeful strides, greeting residents by name while he struggled to keep pace with both her steps and her rapid-fire explanations. This pottery district has been here for 4 generations, she explained, gesturing to a row of workshops where artisans shaped clay with practiced hands. Your company's plans would relocate them to the outskirts where they'd lose their customer base and community connections. Rohan watched an elderly man create intricate designs on a clay pot, his fingers moving with the precision that only comes from decades of practice. They could be provided with modern facilities, he offered, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. Priya shot him a sidelong glance. Would those facilities include the knowledge exchange that happens when 3 generations work side by side? Or the informal apprenticeship system that sustained their craft for centuries? Before he could formulate a response, she was moving again, leading him past a thriving recycling operation, leather workshops, and a small-scale textile factory. All enterprises that Zenith Development's glossy prospectus had reduced to informal economies to be formalized. They paused at a small tea stall where the owner insisted on serving them, despite Priya's protests. The chai was served in small glass cups, sweet and fragrant with cardamom. Rohan noticed how everyone seemed to know Priya. Children waved, elders nodded respectfully, young mothers stopped to chat. "How long have you been working here?" he asked, sipping the unexpectedly delicious tea. "I grew up 3 streets over," she replied, surprising him. Her confident demeanor and articulate speech had led him to assume she came from privilege. "Left for university, came back when developers started circling." "What about you? Always wanted to design luxury towers for the ultra-wealthy?" The question stung more than it should have. "I wanted to create spaces that last," Rohan said quietly. "My father built temporary structures, film sets that were demolished after use. I wanted permanence." Something in Priya's expression softened slightly. "Ironic that you're now in the business of demolishing communities that have lasted generations." The observation hit closer to home than he cared to admit. Rohan changed the subject. "The community center? What happens there besides homework help?" This was apparently the right question. Priya's eyes lit up as she described health clinics, legal aid workshops, vocational training programs, and the community kitchen that served meals to working parents' children. "It's all run by volunteers?" Rohan asked, impressed despite himself. "And community contributions. We operate on the radical notion that people know what they need better than outside experts." The pointed comment wasn't lost on him. As they continued walking, Rohan began to notice details his professional eye had missed in architectural renderings and satellite images. The efficient use of limited space, the ingenious solutions to infrastructure challenges, the vibrant street life that no planned development could replicate. "Your company's proposal," Priya said as they reached a small playground where children played cricket with improvised equipment, "would replace all this with a mixed-use development that reserves just 15% for affordable housing. Where do the other 85% go?" Rohan knew the answer but couldn't bring himself to say it aloud. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably. Days turned into weeks, and to his own astonishment, Rohan kept returning to Dharavi. He told himself it was professional curiosity, a chance to understand the site better. He didn't acknowledge, even to himself, how the hollow feeling in his chest seemed to recede whenever he stepped into the organized chaos of the community center. He began bringing his sketchbook, drawing the architectural solutions residents had devised, multi-purpose spaces that transformed from workshops to living areas, ingenious water collection systems, natural ventilation techniques passed down through generations. Priya remained skeptical of his motives but grudgingly accepted his presence. "At least you're looking now," she conceded one evening as they sat on the center's roof, the Mumbai sunset painting the modest skyline in gold. "What if there was a middle ground?" Rohan ventured. "Development that preserved the community while improving conditions? You mean the mythical win-win that developers always promise and never deliver?" Priya's tone was bitter. "We've heard it before. But what if it was possible?" Rohan pulled out his sketchbook, showing her the ideas he'd been developing, designs that incorporated existing structures, preserved communal spaces, and maintained the mixed-use nature of the area while addressing sanitation and safety concerns. Priya studied his sketches with reluctant interest. "These are different," she admitted, "but your company would never approve them. The profit margins would be too thin." Rohan knew she was right, but something had shifted in him. For the first time in years, he was designing not for acclaim or profit, but for people, real people with names and stories and lives that would be impacted by his work. Meanwhile, at Zenith Developments, questions arose about Rohan's frequent absences and distraction during meetings. His associate Vikram cornered him after a particularly tense planning session. "What's going on with you?" Vikram demanded. "The Dharavi project is our ticket to international expansion, and suddenly you're suggesting community preservation like some activist." "The partners are noticing, Rohan." "I'm just considering all angles," Rohan replied carefully. "There might be approaches we haven't explored. There's only one approach that matters, the one that delivers for our investors." Vikram cut him off. "The demolition schedule is being accelerated. First phase begins next month, starting with that community center that's been organizing the resistance." Rohan felt his stomach drop. That wasn't the timeline. "Plans change," Vikram said flatly. "Just make sure you're on the right side of them." That evening, Rohan sat alone in his minimalist apartment, staring at the cityscape through floor-to-ceiling windows. His reflection stared back at him, superimposed over the glittering lights below. A man caught between worlds, transparent yet divided. His phone buzzed with a text from Priya. "Emergency meeting tomorrow. New information about the development timeline. Will you be there?" Rohan stared at the message, the weight of his double life suddenly crushing. He was the architect of destruction for the very community that had somehow begun to matter to him. And at the center of that community was a woman who would despise him when she learned the truth. His fingers hovered over the screen as he struggled with his response, knowing that whatever he typed would be the first line of a new blueprint, one that would either build or destroy something precious that he hadn't even known he was seeking. Structural compromises, emergency meeting at the community center buzzed with tension. Residents packed the main room, their faces drawn with worry as Priya stood before a hastily assembled projection screen, displaying Zenith Development's revised timeline. The demolition date for their building had been moved up by 6 weeks. "Our sources confirm they're fast-tracking the first phase," Priya explained, her voice steady despite the anxiety evident in her clenched jaw. "They want to start with this center, cut off the head of resistance before addressing the rest of the neighborhood." Rohan stood at the back of the room, his presence now accepted but his insides churning with guilt. Every word she spoke was true. He had seen the revised plans on Vikram's desk yesterday, had sat silently in meetings where executives discussed removing obstacles and discouraging organized opposition. "What about the court injunction?" asked an elderly tailor whose workshop sat adjacent to the center. "They're exploiting a loophole in the land use permit," Priya answered. "Technically, this building was zoned commercial, not community use. Our lawyer is fighting it, but—" She left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. As the meeting progressed into strategy discussions, Rohan slipped outside, needing air that wasn't thick with the consequences of his company's actions, of his complicity. He found himself in the small garden behind the center where community members grew herbs and vegetables in carefully tended plots. Not staying for the battle plans? He turned to find Priya watching him, arms crossed, her expression unreadable in the fading light. "I needed a minute," he admitted. She joined him beside a flourishing tulsi plant. "You've been coming here for weeks now, drawing, asking questions, joining community meals. Why?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. "I told you, professional interest." "No." She shook her head. "There's something else. Nobody from your world crosses into ours without reason." The moment stretched between them, a precipice he could step back from or fall over. In the distance, the lights of his glass tower projects punctuated the skyline, remote and cold compared to the warm glow from the center's windows. "Maybe I'm tired of my world," he said finally, surprising himself with his honesty. "Everything I design is admired but never truly lived in. Here, every space has purpose, history, connection." Priya's expression softened marginally. "That's why we're fighting so hard. This isn't just about buildings. It's about the ecosystem of relationships that makes this place work." Their conversation was interrupted by Arjun, a college student who volunteered at the center's tech lab. "Priya, we found something," he called, waving a tablet. "You need to see this." They followed him inside to a small office where several volunteers huddled around a computer. "We've been digging through property records," Arjun explained. "Look at who owns Zenith Developments. The screen displayed a complex web of holding companies and subsidiaries, but at the center was a name that made Rohan's blood run cold. Sunil Desai, his father. Priya's sharp intake of breath told him she'd made the connection. Desai? Like you? She turned slowly, realization dawning in her eyes. You're not just an architect who works for them. Your family owns Zenith. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than he'd expected, with witnesses he hadn't prepared for. My father founded the company, Rohan admitted, his voice hollow. I'm a partner, yes, but I didn't know about the accelerated timeline until yesterday. But you knew everything else. Priya's voice was dangerously quiet. Every time you sat in our meetings, drew our buildings, ate our food, you knew your company planned to demolish it all. Rohan couldn't deny it. Initially, yes. But these past weeks I've been seeing things differently. I've been working on alternative designs that could get out. The coldness in her voice cut through his explanation. Your alternative designs were never going to happen. This was corporate espionage dressed up as concern. That's not true, Rohan protested, even as the others in the room looked at him with growing hostility. Priya, please, did you enjoy it? She demanded, anger finally breaking through her composure. Playing tourist in our struggle while your company prepared to destroy our lives? Was it entertaining to watch us fight against a timeline you already knew? Each question landed like a physical blow. Worse was the hurt behind her anger, a betrayal he couldn't deny or defend. I'll leave, he said quietly. But what I've learned here, what I've seen, it's changed how I think about architecture, about community. That's real. Save your epiphany for someone who cares, Priya replied, turning away from him. We have a center to save. The next morning, Rohan arrived at Zenith's sleek headquarters earlier than usual. The familiar security protocols and hushed corporate atmosphere felt suddenly foreign, as if he were visiting a place he'd only seen in photographs rather than the company he'd helped build. In his office, he spread out his Dharavi sketches, dozens of designs that incorporated existing structures while addressing infrastructure needs. Designs that would never be approved by the board, by his father, by the investors expecting maximum returns. Vikram appeared in his doorway, frowning at the papers. What's all this? Alternative approaches for Dharavi, Rohan replied, not looking up. Still on that? Vikram sighed, dropping into a chair across from him. Look, the decision's been made. Demolition starts with the community center, then proceeds block by block. Clean slate approach. And the residents? Compensation packages for those with provable ownership. Relocation options for the rest. Vikram shrugged. Standard procedure. There's nothing standard about displacing thousands of people from a functioning economic ecosystem, Rohan said, surprised by the edge in his own voice. Vikram studied him with narrowed eyes. You've been spending too much time in the field. Getting attached is bad business. Maybe business shouldn't be the only consideration. Save the philosophy for your TED Talk, Vikram replied dismissively. By the way, your father wants to see you. Something about the press conference next week. He wants you to present the Dharavi master plan personally. After Vikram left, Rohan sat motionless, staring at his designs. Beautiful, thoughtful solutions that would never be built. Outside his window, Mumbai sprawled in morning light, the distant outline of Dharavi barely visible through the haze. His father's office occupied the top floor, a testament to Sunil Desai's rise from struggling set designer to real estate mogul. The walls displayed architectural models of Zenith's most profitable developments, each one a story of urban renewal that had made the company billions while displacing communities. Rohan, Sunil greeted him with a hearty handshake. At 65, he remained imposing, silver-haired, immaculately dressed, radiating the confidence of a man accustomed to having his vision realized. I want you to lead the Dharavi announcement. Time to put your stamp on the company's future. About that, Rohan began carefully. I've been studying the area extensively. I believe our current approach is flawed. Sunil's smile tightened. Flawed how exactly? We're destroying a functioning economic network. The pottery sector alone employs thousands, not to mention the recycling operations. Textile manufacturers, all inefficient, unregulated enterprises that will be replaced by modern businesses. Sunil interrupted. This isn't about sentiment, son. It's about progress. Whose progress? Rohan countered. Not the residents. Our plan houses less than 20% of the current population on site. Sunil's expression hardened. I built this company transforming underutilized land into valuable property. I didn't succeed by preserving slums. Dharavi isn't just a slum, Rohan insisted, pulling out his sketches. Look at these alternative approaches. We could integrate existing structures, preserve the economic networks while improving infrastructure. His father barely glanced at the drawings. These redesigns would slash our projected returns by half. The board would never approve them. Then we revise our projections. We become known for responsible development instead of displacement. Sunil studied his son with growing displeasure. You've let these community activists get to you. This isn't the architect I raised, the one who understands that sentiment has no place in business. The words hit their mark, but not as Sunil intended. Instead, Rohan felt something crystallize within him, a realization that the values he'd been raised with were fundamentally at odds with the person he wanted to become. Maybe that's the problem, Rohan said quietly. Maybe business needs more sentiment, not less. His father's laugh was cold. Save the idealism. The demolition starts next week, beginning with that troublesome community center. I expect you to be there, representing Zenith as we break ground on Mumbai's future. As Rohan left the office, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. From Priya's friend. Demolition equipment arriving tomorrow morning, not next week. They're coming for the center early. Thought you should know. Rohan stopped in the middle of the corridor, the weight of decision pressing down on him. Ahead lay the path he'd always followed. Success, acclaim, his father's approval. Behind was Dharavi with its vibrant imperfection, its interconnected humanity, and Priya's unwavering conviction. For the first time in his carefully constructed life, Rohan found himself at a structural compromise he couldn't design his way around. Whatever choice he made would permanently alter the foundation upon which he'd built his identity. The foundation shifts dawn. Broke over Mumbai with the muted glow particular to monsoon season, a hazy light filtering through clouds heavy with impending rain. Outside the Dharavi Community Center, residents had formed a human chain 3 people deep, arms linked in silent resistance. News vans lined the periphery, cameras trained on the confrontation unfolding. Priya stood at the center of the front line, facing the yellow bulldozers emblazoned with the Zenith Development logo. Behind her, children clutched handmade signs. This is our home and communities cannot be replaced. They don't have proper documentation, she called to the journalists. The demolition notice requires 7 days posting. This is illegal. The site manager, a thin man with a clipboard and harried expression, conferred with municipal officials while police formed their own line, faces impassive beneath their helmets. The standoff had been underway for 2 hours, neither side willing to retreat. A sleek black car pulled up to the perimeter, drawing attention from the cameras. The door opened and Rohan stepped out, not in his usual tailored suit but in jeans and a simple button-down. He carried a leather portfolio and moved with purpose toward the police line. That's him, someone whispered. The Zenith architect who was spying on us. Priya's eyes locked with his across the divide, her expression hardening as he approached. Whatever he saw in her face made him hesitate briefly before continuing forward. Sir, this area is restricted, a police officer began, but Rohan produced an ID card that made the man step aside. He walked directly to the site manager, their conversation hidden by the noise of idling equipment. The manager's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as Rohan handed him documents from his portfolio. A heated exchange followed, ending with the manager making an urgent phone call. Minutes later, the bulldozer's engines shut down. The site manager approached the police line. There's been a complication with the paperwork, he announced, not looking at the residents. Operations are suspended until further notice. A cautious cheer went up from the crowd. Journalists pressed forward with questions as residents embraced each other in tentative relief. Through the commotion, Rohan made his way to where Priya stood, her arms still linked with those beside her. Can we talk? He asked quietly. Not for me, for the center. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. They retreated to the small garden behind the building, away from the cameras and celebration. What did you do? Priya asked without preamble. Rohan handed her the portfolio. Inside were internal Zenith documents, emails between executives, and the original timeline that contradicted the emergency demolition order. "I leaked these to the press an hour ago," he said simply, "along with evidence that Zenith violated multiple regulations in expediting the demolition. It won't stop them permanently, but it buys time. Weeks, maybe months." Priya leafed through the papers, comprehension dawning. "You're sabotaging your own company, your own family." "I'm choosing a different definition of success," Rohan replied. "But this is just the beginning. Zenith will regroup, file new permits, find another approach. Why?" Priya's question contained multitudes. Why help us? Why betray your company? Why now? Rohan's gaze moved to the community center, where children were already returning to their interrupted homework sessions, resilient in their assumption that their world would continue. "Because you were right," he said finally. "About all of it. Architecture isn't just about designing buildings, it's about understanding the lives that happen inside them." Thunder rumbled in the distance as monsoon clouds gathered. A few drops of rain began to fall, speckling the documents between them. "This doesn't erase what you did," Priya said, but the edge had gone out of her voice. "I know," Rohan acknowledged. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, just the chance to help." By evening, the story had exploded across Mumbai media. "Zenith Air exposes company's illegal demolition attempt," ran one headline. "Architect turns whistleblower against family empire," proclaimed another. Rohan's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Calls from his father, from company lawyers, from journalists seeking comment. He ignored them all, sitting instead in a small tea shop near the community center, watching the steady monsoon rain transform Dharavi's narrow lanes into glistening pathways. The bell above the door jingled as Priya entered, shaking water from her umbrella. She slid into the chair across from him, ordering chai from the proprietor before speaking. "Your father held a press conference. He's claiming you're having a mental health crisis influenced by radical elements." Rohan couldn't help but laugh, a short, bitter sound. "Predictable. Discredit the message by discrediting the messenger. They're also threatening legal action for corporate espionage and breach of confidentiality. Also predictable. Their tea arrived, fragrant and steaming." Priya studied him over the rim of her glass. "What happens to you now?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Rohan had spent the day contemplating this very thing, the consequences cascading from his choice. "Professionally, my career with major developers is over. My reputation in corporate architecture is finished. Personally," he shrugged, "my father will likely disown me figuratively if not legally." "All that for a community center in Dharavi?" Priya's tone wasn't accusatory, merely questioning. "Not just for the center," Rohan said quietly. "For myself, too. I've been building glass towers for people to admire from a distance, never spaces for people to truly live in. I want to create architecture that matters." For the first time since discovering his identity, Priya's expression softened into something approaching understanding. "What will you do?" "I have some savings. Enough to rent a small office, start an independent practice, focus on community-centered design, adaptive reuse projects." He hesitated, then added, "If I still had access to Zenith's resources, I'd have more options to help places like this." "You won't be the company's golden boy anymore?" "No," Rohan admitted, "but I could be something better. An architect who builds with communities rather than over them." The rain intensified, drumming against the shop's metal awning. Around them, Dharavi continued its evening rhythms. Children splashing in puddles, shopkeepers adjusting their displays to protect them from the downpour, neighbors calling greetings to each other as they hurried home. "The community council is meeting tomorrow," Priya said after a long silence. "We're discussing next steps in the legal fight. You should come, not to draw or observe, but to share what you know about Zenith's plans." It wasn't forgiveness or trust, but it was an opening, a foundation upon which something new might be built. Open design 6 months later. The former storage room above the Dharavi Community Center had transformed. Architectural drawings covered the walls, 3D models occupied a central table, and a modest computer setup hummed in the corner. Sunlight streamed through newly installed windows, illuminating the space where Rohan Desai had established his fledgling practice. The legal battle with Zenith had ended in a settlement. Rohan avoided a lawsuit by surrendering his company shares and signing a non-disclosure agreement about specific business practices. In return, he retained his personal savings and professional credentials. It was, as his lawyer had put it, the least worst outcome. His father hadn't spoken to him since the press conference. Knock at the door interrupted Rohan's concentration on a retrofit. Designed for the Pottery District's ventilation system, Priya entered carrying a stack of survey results. The residents' feedback on the water management proposal, she explained, setting them on his desk. 87% approval, with concerns about maintenance costs. Their working relationship had evolved gradually. Professional respect, slowly rebuilding what trust his deception had broken. They were not friends exactly, but partners in a vision that had expanded beyond mere preservation. We can address the maintenance issue by incorporating a cooperative management model, Rohan suggested, making notes. Similar to what worked in the textile sector. Priya nodded, examining the latest designs pinned to his wall. A comprehensive plan for upgrading Dharavi's infrastructure while preserving its essential character and economic networks. What had begun as emergency resistance had evolved into a community-led development initiative that was gaining attention throughout Mumbai. The municipal committee wants our presentation. Next week, she reminded him. Are we ready? The "we" still sounded strange to Rohan's ears, a collaboration he hadn't earned but was grateful to participate in. After his public break with Zenith, he'd expected to be permanently excluded from both worlds, corporate architecture and community activism. Instead, he'd found himself occupying a unique middle ground, translating between the two while developing a new architectural language that honored both formal design and organic community needs. Almost, he replied. I need to finalize the phased implementation timeline and cost projections. A commotion outside drew their attention to the window. Below, a group of international urban planners was touring the Pottery District, guided by residents who explained their work with evident pride. The Dharavi model was attracting interest from cities facing similar challenges: Bangkok, Jakarta, even parts of Rio de Janeiro. Remember when you first came here? Priya asked, watching the tour. You could barely make eye contact with anyone. Rohan smiled ruefully. I was trained to see buildings, not people. And now? He considered the question, looking at the community he'd come to know. The pottery maker teaching his granddaughter traditional techniques while incorporating the improved kilns Rohan had designed. The recycling cooperative that had expanded using his space-efficient sorting systems. The community center itself, now solar-powered with a rooftop garden that supplied the communal kitchen. Now I understand that the best architecture grows from the people who will live in it, he answered. Design should serve life, not dictate it. Priya studied him with that evaluating look he'd come to know well, the one that still searched for authenticity beneath his words. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded slightly before turning back to the plans. The council has another request, she said, her tone deliberately casual. They want to establish a training program, teaching community members architectural drafting, basic engineering principles, design fundamentals. They asked if you would consider directing it. The proposal caught him off guard. They want me to teach? More like mentor. Help develop local talent so future development can come from within, rather than being imposed from outside. The invitation represented something Rohan hadn't dared hope for. Not just temporary collaboration, but long-term investment in Dharavi's future, a role that acknowledged both his professional expertise and the community's rightful authority over its own space. I'd be honored, he said simply. Later that evening, as they shared chai on the center's roof, a habit that had become part of their working routine, Mumbai's skyline glittered before them. Among the gleaming towers stood the incomplete skeleton of what would have been Zenith's flagship development. Construction halted indefinitely after the scandal and subsequent investigations into the company's practices. Your father announced his retirement today, Priya mentioned, having seen the news on her phone. Vikram is taking over as CEO. Rohan absorbed this with complicated emotions. His father, who had built something significant if flawed, stepping away from his life's work. He's only 65. That's early for him. The press release cited health concerns, Priya added, then hesitated before asking, Do you regret it? Walking away from all that? The question deserved careful consideration. Rohan thought about the career he'd abandoned, the family relationships strained or severed, the prestige and wealth he'd surrendered. Then he looked around at where those choices had led him, to meaningful work, to architecture that served human needs rather than corporate ambitions, to a community where his contributions mattered not for their appearance but for their function. "No," he said finally. "I regret the years I spent designing spaces that impressed but didn't connect. Buildings should bring people together, not separate them into hierarchies of exclusion." A comfortable silence fell between them. In the months of working together, Rohan had come to appreciate Priya's fierce intelligence, her unwavering commitment to her community, and her grudging willingness to consider new approaches when they served the greater good. What had begun as antagonism had evolved into mutual respect and lately, something that might cautiously be called friendship. "We should celebrate the municipal presentation when it's done," he suggested. "Perhaps dinner somewhere." Priya gave him a sideways glance, a smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "Somewhere in Dharavi, I assume? Or were you thinking one of those rooftop restaurants in your glass towers?" "Wherever you recommend," Rohan replied, recognizing her gentle teasing for the progress it represented. "I've learned to trust local expertise." Her laughter was warm in the evening air, a sound he'd come to value more than the accolades and applause of his previous life. Below them, Dharavi pulsed with activity even as evening approached, children playing in the community courtyard, artisans working late to fill orders, neighbors gathering for shared meals. It wasn't perfect. Challenges of sanitation, density, and economic stability remained, but it was vital in a way no planned development could replicate. "You know," Priya said thoughtfully, "when you first showed up at the center, I thought you were just another architect with savior fantasies, here to impose your vision of improvement on people who never asked for it." "That's exactly what I was," Rohan admitted. "I thought good design could only come from experts like me. And now?" He gestured to the community below them. "Now I understand that the best designs emerge from conversation between technical knowledge and lived experience. Neither is complete without the other." In the fading light, they returned to their plans, not blueprints imposed from above, but open designs emerging from the community they served. Together, they sketched a future that honored both innovation and tradition, expertise and experience, vision and reality. The glass towers of Rohan's past still punctuated Mumbai's skyline, but they no longer represented his definition of success. Instead, he found fulfillment in the messy, vital, human-scale work of building with, rather than for, creating spaces where life could flourish in all its complexity. As night fell over Dharavi, lights came on in homes and workshops, illuminating a community that had not only survived but was now actively shaping its own future. Among those lights was the small office above the community center, where two unlikely collaborators continued working well into the evening, redefining not just a neighborhood, but the very purpose of architecture itself.